Four. Four in person. Great. All right. So I guess, let's see. I had this weird realization today, like in terms of performance in general. I used to work at MPAC for the longest time, and we've had some events and some concerts and things, and the phenomenon of the sort of the laptop performer is always an interesting one. You know, they get up on stage and they're there at their laptop and things are going on. You know, DJs or producers, whatever, artists, and they're working away at their laptop. And it's a live event and everyone's enthralled and there's all stuff going on, but they're just, the person's there at their laptop and they're not like performing, well, they're performing, but the performative aspect of it versus, you know, playing musical instruments where they're, you know, part of the performance is away from the laptop. And it's odd in the whole pandemic, just a side note here, that we're sort of becoming that, instruction supposed to be just all at our laptop and what's in person, what's recorded, it's all a blur now. It's interesting. Anyway, side note. So, today the main topic, or main thing I guess, is that the project should be due tonight, or is due, but should be completed, handed in tonight. So excited to see the shoot 'em up style games. And we have also, I went through, there's still a few missing submissions with regards to sort of your playtesting feedback, or some of them. So if you haven't already submitted a playtesting feedback in the other, or online in LMS, do include it with, or you can go back and add one, or at least include it with your submission, and certainly any changes that you made or any accommodations you made based on the feedback of the playtesting, you want to point that out. It's a good part. You know, if your game was perfect to begin with, I suppose it's hard to, you know, have feedback based on that. But there seems to always be, hopefully, room for improvement. And if you haven't finished your game, which maybe I'm assuming some people haven't, and they're just working on that, which is why they're not in lecture today or they're not online at the moment. Feel free, you know, today's the day to do that. So sometimes we would have studio classes on the due dates. So we'll, in the pandemic age, it's kind of weirder than that, and not having regular office hours, but always being accessible via Discord online. Who knows? So we'll have a relatively short class today, so you can finish up your project or try out some of the stuff I'm going to show today. The topic today is kind of, it's an important one, especially if you're looking at other game engines, if you're familiar with Unreal, for example. It's going to be weird to sort of introduce a topic that's super important in Unreal, but in introducing it in Unity. But it's sort of I think sort of a gentle introduction to the concept of visual programming, or node and wire based, or there's all sorts of graph-based programming. Has anyone here who's in person, anyone, or even if you're online, feel free to shout out, encountered any kind of graph-based programming in anything? What? Unreal. In Unreal, okay, of course. The blueprint system in Unreal is a really good example of it. There's lots of other applications that have been around for a long time. Process automation things, LabVIEW. If you ever did first Lego League, there used to be the Lego Mindstorms had a LabVIEW extension that was sort of optimized for real computing, even using the Lego Mindstorms bricks. And it's a style of programming that, you know, it doesn't appeal to everybody. A lot of people, their immediate reaction is like, well, I could write code faster than that, sort of thing. And it's definitely worth checking out, though, because there are systems that are sort of optimized around it. Unreal being one where, you know, in programming in Unreal, you basically have two choices. You could do your programming in C++, which of course everybody goes in thinking, yeah, we're doing everything in C++. Or you can use blueprints, which is their visual scripting language. And it winds up that, I think, a lot of people wind up being kind of won over by blueprints in Unreal, but not nearly as many get won over by Bolt in Unity. But Unity recently, within the last year and a half, maybe 2 years now, acquired the Bolt visual scripting engine or language from a company called Ludic, Ludiq, I think is the spelling. And they have actually starting with Unity 2021? Yeah, 2021, they're going to be including it just with the standard distribution, so their answer to blueprints. And like I said, it's a style of programming that it's designed around this sort of, a little bit sort of exploration, a little bit of live coding. It's very visual, kind of process-oriented, where you have flow of information, where something will happen and it will kind of trigger and move. You know, so if you're familiar with like flow charting or that sort of thing, maybe it'll appeal to you. Or maybe you'll say, no, I just want to, I'm far more a traditional programmer, and I like C#, or I like C++, or I like Python, or whatever traditional programming language you're used to. But let's maybe just dive in and let you form your own opinions. All right. So what I have in front of me here is a typical Unity workspace, except that I have actually already added Bolt to my project here, which is, I haven't actually tried, I have 2021 on my machine somewhere, but I haven't checked it out to see how it's integrated. But if you are starting from 2020 or prior, you would normally go to the package manager, and you can buy, or you can go to the asset store or the package manager. Let's see, so if I say window, well, asset store is going to say, yeah, it's available on the web. So go here and you can look for Bolt, and it is a free tool. In this case, you see I've already purchased it, quote unquote. It's free. You just click on that and you get to own it. Add that to your account. And then you can add the package using the package manager, which is basically how all of the assets now are packages. And you can see I've got lots of different packages here. But of course, the one I'm interested in is Bolt. So let's see. So you'll see Bolt down here. And I've already downloaded it. If I hadn't, it would ask me, do I want to download it? Do I want to, after I download it, do I then want to import it into this project? I've already done that. So set that aside. I love waiting for Unity to take 5 minutes to do anything during a lecture. So did it ahead of time. And then after you bring it into the project, it'll step you through some configuration gyrations, and I'll try to do the quick version of it here. I think if I look, you'll see the setup wizard here. Welcome to Bolt, and you'll say next. Do you want to have human naming of objects, or do you want to have programmer naming? I always choose programmer naming since I'm already used to the Unity API and what transform dot position as opposed to transform get position or so on. So if you're used to programming in C#, you've taken this course so far, programmer naming is probably the way to go. So after you say programmer naming, then it'll say, okay, do you want to import? What do you want to import? I just go ahead and say next. It'll import everything. And then after that, it'll say, well, okay, now what types do you want to use for your variables and so on? So it establishes this mapping from its visual tool set its visual representation over to the normal Unity representation of anything. At this point, I'm not going to hit generate, but once you hit generate, then it'll go through and finish up. And that'll be, then you'll have Bolt installed. And not much will look different in Unity, except you'll see under your tools menu, you'll see this Bolt menu with about, and a manual, a setup wizard, and so on and so forth. So lots of options if you need to make any sort of changes or you have anything weird happen. If you add other packages and you want to generate interfaces to them and so on, you might need to go through there. But we're just going to kind of leave that for now. Now, if you're following along and you went ahead and installed Bolt in your normal project, let's cross our fingers and hope that doesn't have any problems. In earlier versions, and I should have said this before, just in case, it's probably best if you're going to do Bolt, try it in some other project first. So have some sandbox that you try things in, just in case, because it's becoming lighter and lighter in weight, but it used to be kind of heavyweight, and it used to do some weird things with WebGL exports and so on. But I think it's pretty safe now, but unless you're really convinced to go Bolt, try it in the sandbox first. Don't necessarily add it to your project. You can remove it later, but it's, just for sanity's sake. Should have said that first. But hopefully, did anyone already install? No. I went ahead here in a separate, this is in Bolt sample that I just made. So again, not much changes in the interface. So what I did is I just went ahead and I had some assets here. There's a bandits pack which had some animated bandits, little character, sword-wielding bandit of some sort. And I went ahead and used that as the sprite I want to use. And this asset pack actually has some animations already built in. So what I did is first I just dragged in a single sprite, making a 2D sprite object there. And then I went and it happened to have these animations, and I could find the animator controller here that I could use, drag that in, populate this bandit here. And so if I just hit play with that animator on the bandit, he goes into sort of this idle animation, I think. Just zoom in on a little bit. Kind of a subtle little idle animation, just kind of sits there, does his own thing. And why don't we center him on the screen just because, just to make life simpler. All right, not much to see so far. We'll make the game 16:9 aspect ratio. Also just to get things going there. Now, one of the things that is, I think, will push you one way or the other in terms of visual programming, visual scripting. It's nice to have a big monitor. It's nice to have a separate monitor and things. Doing everything with visual scripting on the same monitor, that's one of the key things that gets kind of old quick in the way it's kind of done. So bear that in mind if you want to use Bolt. I think just a warning at 1080p display these days is feeling more and more cramped than it used to. So anyway, so we have our little character here and our light bandit. We'll just call it light bandit. Get rid of that stuff that was just left over from the naming. And you'll notice here I've already created this new thing. Over here you'll see something called variables, and you'll see something called the flow machine. Now, the way that I add a Bolt script or a Bolt machine or Bolt graph is the same as any other component. I can just say add component. You'll see that there's Bolt listed now. And there's a few basic components with Bolt. And for starters, the main one we're interested in is the flow machine. There's two types of machines. The state machine and the flow machine. A state machine is largely used for more advanced topics like AI. So if you want to have, state and conditions and kind of more complex machine behavior, AI kind of things, state machine can be used for that. But the concepts are all very similar, and flow machine is the basic one that we're interested in. So if I add a new flow machine here, let's see, it just added one, and it probably will automatically add this variables component as well. There's a couple of different things that happen behind the scenes with Bolt, in that there are variables that it creates local to the object that this is on, and also variables that are part of the scene and variables that are part of the project. And these all sort of happen in the background. So if you click on the window menu, you'll see also some new choices here, the graph inspector, and variables. Right. So now we'll be able to see certain variables that are associated with Bolt. So we've got some new kind of built-in things here. So object, scene, and application. We don't have a graph open at the moment, so graph is not available. So if I come over here now, I happen to have, in my interface, I've changed things around. Normally the flow graph will be sort of popped out. And now that Unity is full screen on here, it's just, let's see, there. Oops, no, I wanted to. I sort of have to see what I mean about the interface. Let's see if I pop it out here. Let's see. No. I'll leave it and I'll put it back at the bottom. That'll be better. All right, so back to the inspector. We have our light bandit. We now see we have a flow machine. And let's see, normally the project would be there. I'll hide that so we don't have to see it too much about it. So a few different things. You'll now see that their source is either a macro, at least a macro, or embed. And Bolt graphs or components can either be embedded within that component, so that it's kind of like having the script code directly there in the component, or it can reference basically a template or sort of a prefab, so it's kind of one more level of indirection if you create a macro. So a macro will reference some external thing that you've made. Like for example here, I have a macro asset for Bolt, or it could have been directly in here if I said, well, embed. You'll notice the name, target, and all that sort of went away, and it's just like this is going to be inside, directly inside that component. Right? So you have your choice to have something that you can reuse. If you use a macro, you can reuse it across lots of different things, or you can just embed a graph, a flow machine graph, directly inside of this flow machine component. Right? So that's the one that's there. All right. Now, basically, so once you have, we'll just leave it embed, and we'll say edit graph. It will open up the flow graph window, and we might want to name it something for now, Bolt test. And you can use these as, they're just tags, whatever you want. This is a test. All right, very exciting. As much text as you want, description in there. And the graph is basically the class. Right? So just like we had a monobehavior and we derived a new component class from a monobehavior, we are creating this flow graph that inherits, behind the scenes, inherits from a monobehavior. So you'll see there's a start event and an update event, just like our normal monobehavior derived class would have. Right? Start and update. So these are sort of predefined entry points, just like that sample code that Unity would give us inside of a class. And you can move them around wherever you want. We can also zoom in and out, and if you middle mouse button, you can move around. So scrolling, will different things, kind of, yay, typical move around kind of stuff. All right. So these are the first two units that it describes. So anything that's a block is more or less called a unit inside of the Bolt graph here. And now it's a matter of hooking things up to that. So we create, for every sort of variable, every entity, every operation, we're going to be creating these units and tying them together. Right? So, for example, maybe we just want to say, we want to do something simple like print out something, say hello. So I'm going to right-click in here, and it'll give me a list of possible units that I can put. And it is largely, kind of one of these choose your own adventure to some degree. It's just, you just need sort of an inkling of what it is that you want to do, and the auto-completion is your best friend in here. So I just said print, and oh, okay, mono-behavior print. All right, let's choose that. That's great. So we've got the typical mono-behavior print, and you'll see it has this message here. And if I said, well, okay, print that, you'll notice it's orange. And, oh, why? There we go. Oh, that's just, oh, that's another screen here. All right. The orange basically means something isn't quite complete. It doesn't know what message to actually print, but the idea is that this is the start function, and the first thing the start function is going to do is it's going to call print. So things that are on the left-hand side of one of these units fall into sort of two categories. There's a flow, which is to say what their actual program flow is. This triggers that. You can think of it as a trigger kind of thing. Or there's data. Right? So data, if it needs something, it's going to try to pull things into this opening if it's connected to anything. Right now it's not connected. So if I press play, and I go to the console, let's see what it decides to do here. You'll see it's a missing value port input exception. It doesn't know what message to print. So let's give it a message to print. So I'll right-click again, and I'll just say string, whoops, add unit, string. And you'll see lots of possibilities in terms of strings, what I can do. Conversions and splits and just basically everything to do with string. So I can join, trim, copy, convert, and so on. But let's just do something simple and just say string literal. Okay, a literal is just a variable that or not even a variable, it is just a sort of constant. So we're going to put hello world. So that is just a constant string there, and we're going to grab that and put that into the message. Now you'll notice it looks a lot happier. And if I press play and look at the console, hello world. So we've done hello world in Bolt. Right. That's the basic idea, is that we're going to have either functions or variables that will kind of be pushed or pulled through here. You'll see here there's not a arrow here, meaning, okay, this is just a data connection. So if this is needed, it's just going to kind of pull things through this part here. And as you get more complicated, you'll see what I mean by pulling. So after the print would happen, then I'd be free to have more stuff to happen next. Right? So I could drag that off and say, well, what else do I want to do? Well, okay, what do I want to do? I take the light bandit, and I could say, well, the transform, I could so on and so on. Out that, whoops. A little bit weird. So you could continue on your execution here. So let's do something like that. Let's say we have the start event and the update event here on the bandit, and say I wanted to move the bandit, and I'm going to go all the way back to the old way of doing it, just to be, well, maybe not. Maybe I'll do it the more complex way. We can handle it. We're feeling up to it. So we're going to add a component, and we're going to add a rigid body 2D. All right, so everything is working pretty much like normal. We'll add a rigid body 2D, and we will say gravity scale is 0 on this for now, just because. All right. So we have a rigid body 2D on our light bandit, and in update, we want to move the position, or maybe in start we even want to say, all right, let's set the velocity of our bandit. So I can right-click, add unit, rigid body 2D, and if I choose that, I can choose a rigid body 2D literal. I can expose the elements. So exposing usually means show me all of, like, let's see this here. It is showing me all of the possibilities that a rigid body 2D, you know, all the members, all the not all the members, all of the attributes and so on of the rigid body. You can expose all of them, right? So if I wanted to query for something, I could grab that. So I'm not so much interested in what's there, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and we'll say rigid body 2D, and from there we could say that is the rigid body 2D of the bandit. So this is a way of getting the rigid body 2D of either, it could be either of self, sometimes that'll show up, since this is a literal one, it wants to find a reference to it, but that's fine. So we'll get that rigid body 2D. Actually, I'll delete this one. Light bandit, rigid body 2D, and we will set the velocity. So if I look for rigid body 2D velocity set, you see now it's automatically said, all right, of the self, it'll grab the one that we happen to be on, so that's good. All right, let's do that. And let's set it to something. Let's set it to some value. So we'll just say 2. So x is 0, y is 2, or the red, I should say, the red is 2 there, I think. And now if I press play, oh, yeah, it went up. So it was y. 2. So it sets its velocity during the start. And all right, my scaling makes it look really ugly there. So if I look in the scene, you'll see it traveling off the scene there. All right. You can get it anything. You can say add unit input dot get axis. Horizontal. I'm going to make sure I'm spelling that right. Project settings, input manager, axis, horizontal, right? That's what I'm going to be grabbing. So I'm going to grab this, and now you'll see I have, well, I've got 2 pieces here. So somehow I need to take this axis, and maybe I'll just copy that, or I could have said duplicate that, and we'll get vertical. Have a horizontal and vertical, and I'll say vector 2, whoops, And I could say, well, let's take the X and the Y, and we're going to put that into that. And we just have to figure out the flow now. So we want to say start, and whoops, we'll go here, 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 done. So we were setting the rigid body, we're combining these two, and we're doing it in start, which we don't want to do. We want to do it in update, so we're going to do that. Get rid of that one. And if all goes well, if I got it right, we're up, down, left, and right. So we've created a super simple character controller using Bolt. Right. As I'm running, you'll see that it's showing me the execution here. Right? If I had it in start event, it would have just happened once, and then so one little bubble would have percolated throughout the whole thing. But here, since it's continuously happening, updates happening over and over and over again, much faster than it's really visually indicating here. But that's the idea, so it can help debug. And you can even do things like let's see. You can, if you wanted to put print statements in between, I thought there was a way to put a debug, or am I thinking of a different, am I thinking of max MSP now? Let's come back to that. It used to be a way to, I think there's a way to kind of watch the values. Oh, well, actually there was there, wasn't it? That 0, they're exposed by default. They've been changing this. Yeah, there's 0. So let's see if I in here. Yeah, it is already exposed. I think you used to have to set that. So you can see the value that's being sent. So even without having to put debug statements in there. And it's all live. So I can see my X, my Y, etc., etc. You can have conditionals, just like anything else, which are actually branches. So let's see, where did I just put a branch in here? Branch. So this is changing the branch of execution, right? So since this is all about this flow here, we basically wind up with a situation that is, if this statement here, this pink dot, which is a Boolean, right? So a pink dot, sort of pinkish dot here, that's a Boolean. Orange is a string. Blue is a float. So there's some color coding there. So if this Boolean, whatever this is sent to, is true, then execution will continue along this. If it's false, it'll continue along this. It won't happen when this changes. It'll only happen when this is activated. So if this is activated, then it checks to see is this true or false and decides how this is going to flow through it. Right? So say we did something, I'll try to do a simple one here. We'll do a add unit, and we'll call get key. It filled it in for us, input get key. And we'll say key, and the key I'm interested in is, where are we here? I wanted, Use fuse. No. Guess I have to say, let's see, Z. All right, so if Z is pressed, I'm going to put that here. Put that one there. So before I check the axes, I'm going to say, well, all right, if Z is pressed, go through here, and now, kind of a weird situation, it'll only do movement if the Z is pressed, right? So if Z is true, then true will happen. So let's hold down a button and see what happens, right? So normally my WASD keys, nothing is happening, right? When it's false. Now you'll see it's true. So now I can move, right? Because my Z key is pressed. So this is the sort of typical branching that we can do. We can also do things like while loops. So kick off a loop when we exit, or the part that we do over and over and over again. And we have a Boolean to say, well, how long do we stay in that while loop? Right? We have for and for each. So we can iterate over things. What other things? Now, you'll notice we don't have, so I'm going to type coroutine. There are start-stop coroutine events as well. There are certain situations, like in here, if you want to define a coroutine, then we start getting interesting. So now we start to create our own event types. So this changed a little bit here. Let's see something. Oh, there we go, events. All right. So I can do things like on enable, start, update, fixed update, late update, on disable, on destroy. Now, if I want to create my own event, very charming little wizard hat, and oh, they changed it. It used to be, I thought it used to be a way to specifically tell an event that it is a enumerable event, so basically a candidate for being a coroutine. Name event, trigger custom event. Oh, okay, wait. drawing a blank on that one at the moment. Okay. So basically, all I really wanted to do today was sort of whet your appetite with regards to this. Like I said, I've seen a lot of reactions. People are like, well, I could have, once you know exactly what you're doing, you could just code it all directly anyway. So it's a 6 of one, half dozen of another. And like I said, for some reason, people love using blueprints in Unreal and have yet to sort of necessarily jump on Bolt in the same way. So it kind of flips the other way around in Unity. Any questions directly on Bolt, other than well, why would I use it? Ultimately, is it more or less efficient? It does generate code. It winds up going through the whole thing. So by the time you're running, it's not going to have a bad, a major impact on performance. It is pretty good at the code it generates, just like anything else. So it doesn't really impact the size or execution that much. These days, code generation is a lot better than it used to be. You can even do, instantiate prefabs, anything. I've yet to run across anything that it couldn't do that you could do in script. It's just a matter of creating the appropriate sort of spaghetti that you need to make it do what you want it to do. So let's add one other thing. So for example, maybe now we have get axis, and let's declare some variables. That's one thing we should kind of show. So say you wanted to have a variable for speed. So in here, with this graph selected, we can go over to that blackboard, which is where the Bolt variables are. And we're going to create a graph variable, which is local to this graph here. Right? And I'm going to give it the name of speed, create speed. I'm going to call it I'm going to make it a float, or I could even make it a vector2. So I have a speed, no, I'm going to just scale that. So let's see, float, and its value is going to be 3. So now in my graph, I can right-click, and if I were to type speed, you'll see it automatically has get speed, set speed, and it is a graph variable. Right? So I could say get speed. So this is the get. So I could say, do I want to get the graph variable, the object variable, the scene variable, the application, or a saved variable of this name? So right now I only have one named. So if I came over here and I created another one, I'm going to enter that first. Slow, and we'll call that float, and we'll call that 1. I can actually decide to use slow or speed if I wanted it on there. So let's decide to do this, and let's make it so that if I press the Z key, I go fast. If I don't press the Z key, I go slow. A little bit more useful, or more applicable, perhaps, right? So we'll have, I'm going to duplicate this, and one of them will be getting slow, and the other one is getting, I should rename this, fast. And let's see, I don't know what it did with speed. That still exists. Graph. Okay, doesn't exist anymore. So now we have just slow and fast. And somewhere I have to have it figure out, all right, which one is it going to pull? So to scale the vector here, before we pass it over to our rigid body, we're going to just add a multiply, add unit. And in this case, I'm going to say mult. And it'll offer me a whole bunch of different types. And I'm just going to grab well, let's see. I'm going to grab a generic multiply. All right. And let's see. Do that. And take that as the output here. So now it is by default multiplying fast times that. And I have to figure out some way of doing that. Whoops. That's interesting. That when I move things to the left, it moves everybody to the right. It's kind of a new behavior. There's probably a shift key or something. Or no, Alt moves everybody. All right. So let's put another variable, a local variable, called, this one will be called speed. And it will also be a float. And now we'll have speed set. So we'll tell this that the multiply, we will multiply by speed. And so let's have it be this way. Whoops. Here. So now we have to determine who gets to set it. So we could instead do this. Let's take that, copy, paste. And we know we want to have one version here, and we'll duplicate it. The other version here. And now slow will be if Z is not pressed. So we'll say that one. And fast will be if Z is pressed. So it'll be that one. Now, we have this output here, but we're already setting speed here, so we shouldn't have to, because we already have the get speed. Well, not the set, we wanted get. Speed get there. And in the case of get, this is one of those cases where we don't have to have the flow here because it's going to pull the value when it actually calls for it here. Notice that there is no arrow on either of these because they're going to wind up being pulled whenever this becomes active. So we are getting there, setting there, and let's go for it. All right. So he moves, and if Z is pressed, he moves fast. You can do things like create macros that call other macros, and so you can have sort of subroutines if you want to. Let's see here. I used to be able to do this. No. Well, this slightly changed. Not remembering now. A super unit. So a super unit has input and output. I guess it's going to make us copy and paste. So if I wanted to grab, say, all of this, copy that, go into my super unit, paste it, and I have to tell it about this input, what is allowed, what type of input is allowed here. Yikes. No, that's changed too. All right. Let's go. Let's see how good its help is. So, manual. Input. Personally, I'm always excited about the idea bolt, and then something like this happens where I'm like, oh, what's some kind of weird thing that it did? And it's like, okay, I'm going to stick to programming, or stick to traditional programming. No. You would expect a visual programming language that ultimately I'd click and it'd be like lots of visual things to say. Here's how I. And instead, I get this wonderful text-based. No. Well. Is it? I'm going to leave that for now because I'm just going to, otherwise you're going to just see me trying to remember how I did it once upon a time. Okay, so in the spirit of how we used to do things and having studio classes or kind of reprieve days on the day when a project is due, we'll kind of end there. Maybe you're intrigued by Bolt. Maybe you're convinced you'll never be interested in it. There are other things in Unity that also take this visual programming paradigm that personally and productivity-wise I see a lot more use of than Bolt, which is when you are creating shaders. And what a shader is, or a shader is a part of a material that allows you to sort of change how something is rendered. And for that, there's another system that is built in called shader graph that allows you to, that allows you to do things like create effects, create like transparency effects or shifting images or water effects, and so on and so on and so on. And that is it also do I have to add that as well? Shader graph is included by default. Well, we'll pick up with shader graph next time. And we'll just, like I said, give everyone a reprieve. If you've done your project and you're all set and want to just relax, by all means, or if you want to use the next extra hour to finish your project, by all means do that. And we'll call it end of official stuff after that 1 hour. Any questions? There were bonus points for actually using Bolt if you want in some meaningful way, a little bit, if you create at least moderately interesting graph that does something. I think.
Is there a way to write functionality in like a C# script and then have Bolt run that?
You can, just like any other class, you can call other classes and reference other components and things.
You can do that, like the enemy have like the enemy behavior if this happens, and then basically do like state machine.
Yeah, the state machine part, which the state machine part is a lot more interesting, but it's also a lot more complex. Why Bolt? I'm using capital Bolt. So yeah, the state machine implemented in here, where you have, you can create states, have an enter condition, an exit condition, as long as you're in this state, do this sort of thing, for kind of cooking up behaviors and then calling out to other Unity scripts or other behaviors. That part is, I think, potentially more interesting, but it still requires a certain amount of kind of getting used to Bolt in the first place. But yeah, I think I would agree. I think the combination of it going all in on Bolt is just not something I'm quite personally ready for yet, and I find it too easy to kind of avoid it. I'm a terrible advertising for Bolt, but.
I think it's just tedious to write anything that's longer than like a paragraph, because then it's like all the arguments have their own separate things, and you have to like drag everything around, make sure they don't overlap.
Yeah.
If this stuff.
Literally spaghetti code.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometime there will be some point we'll cross some threshold. Now suddenly be convinced. All right. So on that note, have a great weekend. Look forward to seeing your projects, and we'll take it from there. Next time we'll start talking about some of the more advanced things like 2D lighting and shading and so on. That's, again, it's a sort of optional feature, more advanced, worth bonus points kind of thing. But that's a fun one.